It's Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and I'm here today with my colleagues, Keith Greenwood and Ernest Perry. On our program this week, 1 year after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we'll talk about what's been happening this week as the anniversary nears this Friday, including the president's surprise visit to Kyiv. Don Lemon's return to CNN this morning. We'll talk about what's gone on since his sexist and rather thoughtless comment on that show last Thursday morning, and rumors swirling about the long-term health of Sinclair's regional sports networks has professional sports leagues scrambling to figure out a future that doesn't include cable TV. There's a lot more that hopefully we'll get to before today's half hour is up, but we're going to start with the news that former President Jimmy Carter entered hospice this past weekend, choosing to spend his final days at home in Plains, Georgia, surrounded by family and friends. And again, I do want to remind people, as I do many weeks on this show, that we are recording it at about 5 minutes after 11 on Wednesday morning. So by the time this show airs on KBIA at 6:30 this evening, things could have changed. The situation could be different. But from what we know right now, President Carter is still alive. He's in his home. He's surrounded by people he cares about and who care about him. But if you were to watch TV news, or if you were to be looking at the papers or the news websites this past week, you wouldn't necessarily think that, given the number of what feels like and seems like obituary and legacy reports going already.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because there's a lot of tributes which usually come after the person is deceased, but you're seeing a lot of it now, which I don't think is a bad thing compared to the way in which we usually do this, but it also shows that there was a plan in place, not only by the news media, but also a plan in place by Carter and his family about how they wanted this to go forward. So it sort of in some ways looks orchestrated to a certain extent, but I also think that the two plans are sort of meshing together, and that maybe wasn't, something that was really...
It's interesting that you say that, because there's part of me that wonders, thinking back to some of the conversations we had a couple of months ago in the passing of Queen Elizabeth and how orchestrated that was, if maybe there was a lesson learned there, or maybe a plan that was created after that, and seeing what that coverage looked like.
Yeah, I mean, possibly so. I mean, because we knew that he was sick. We knew that eventually this was gonna take place.
He is 98.
He is 98, and you have all that set and ready to go. It's, when do you roll it out? How do you orchestrate that? What's going to happen after he passes away? How's that going to look?
Well, and so Keith, I kind of want to ask you about that, because as you're seeing this coverage on TV, there's also this question of, he could be sitting and watching it. There's something to be said for recognizing someone while they're still able to see and to hear and to receive those compliments and to know what people are saying about them. But then what are we going to be seeing once it happens? Are we kind of using up the good stories now?
I would say no, but certainly using some good stories. Yeah. But yeah, it's a very interesting development in that they announced basically, or the Carter Center announced basically, that this guy has ongoing health concerns, and he doesn't want to continue going in and out of the hospital. But nothing indicates something's going to happen this week or this month or in the next 6 months. But that sense of, okay, this is a major development, and I think a little bit of it really comes about in the political environment, that this guy has been such a different post-president in terms of his public service, in terms of living a quiet life. Mm-hmm. In a political sort of divided environment we have now, being able to kind of point to and go, there's another way to do this, might sort of be part of starting to set a legacy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about the legacy part of it, in terms of, because most people know more about Jimmy Carter post his presidency than they do about what happened in his presidency. You're starting to see some of that where they talk about the hostage, the situation in Iran with Tehran, talk about how difficult difficult of an economy that created while he was president, the fact that he was the president that sort of came after Nixon and Ford and Watergate and the public's sort of distrust of government. And then now you move into what he's done for Habitat for Humanity, the fact that he was a global peacemaker. He did all of those things post-presidency, which is not something that you've seen, especially over the course of, say, the last two presidencies.
Yeah, most people don't peak after they've been president of the United States of America, right?
Right. Yeah, it's usually, you go quietly into the good night, and that wasn't the case with him. And I think that there are other presidents who tried to emulate him. I mean, Bill Clinton's tried to do much of that in his post-presidency. People anticipate that Obama's going to be doing some of that, but not to the level and the extent which Carter did.
Right. Yeah. And building that center to actually sort of promote that and bring other people in to work with other organizations.
Right.
Okay. Friday marks the one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. On Monday, President Biden made a surprise visit to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky and what is being called a defiant display of Western solidarity. It's been a week of stories that are asking a lot of the same thing. How did it get this bad? I'm thinking about the 60 Minutes piece that ran Sunday night about the power grid and how people are surviving in Kyiv right now with so very few resources. And where do we go from here? What does an end look like?
I'm not sure anyone really knows that. I mean, it's been a longer, more protracted conflict than anybody really expected it to be. Some, at least military analysis, that Russia has sort of spent most of what it had to be able to commit to a conflict in Ukraine. The fact that Ukraine has been around and resisted and pushed back, it wasn't something anybody necessarily expected up front. But it also means that what else is there to report on and talk about?
And that's the key. What else is there to report on? And I think where this is sort of shifting is where do the big powers land? What is NATO going to do? How is China going to factor into this? You see a lot of stagecraft. Especially around this one-year anniversary. I mean, the fact, we knew Biden was going to Europe, and we knew that he was going to be somewhere close, and there was all of this sort of conjecture: will he go or will he won't go? Well, of course he went, and he went, and they basically told Russia, "Hey, the president's going to go visit Kiev. Don't try anything." Okay, so it was that stagecraft was there, but now once the anniversary passes, what happens at that point? Because I think one of the things that we're finding out, and the Russians definitely found this out, is that the Ukrainians are going to fight. They're ready for a protracted. They were ready for a protracted war. They're not going to give in. And I think what Russia realized was that they were hoping for a quick battle, and then Ukraine would just sort of become part of their empire, and that didn't happen. And so now they're trying to figure out what happens here. Again, it's one of those big major power goes in thinking they're the big bully on the block, and they're going to take over, and then they find themselves in a quagmire. How often have we seen that over the course of the last, 40, 50 years? Definitely since the Second World War. So again, we find ourselves in that situation.
Well, and the things that Russia's had to do to communicate that to their own citizens. I mean, they clamped down on media pretty quickly of, you either follow the party line, so to speak, or we're going to shut you down. And then being able to use that and try to use that in the eastern Ukraine areas that they've captured to be able to say, this is really what's going on. This is what you should be understanding and believing. And to the best of our knowledge or ability, we're going to try to keep all other news sources away from it.
And that's the thing that surprises me, is that their ability to be able to do that. I mean, you've seen Russia do that to a certain extent around dissidents within Russia, but even that news seems to to get out, but when it comes to Ukraine, they have really clamped down and be able to sustain that kind of censorship over the course of a year while also engaged in a pretty significant military operation. So, I mean, that's the surprising part of it. But you also have this counter narrative that's going out there from the West about the atrocities, and you're starting to hear more and more about that, war crimes and that situation. So it's going to be interesting to see how much longer Russia is going to be able to maintain that censorship.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you both about something that our social media producer, Nate Brown, shared with me yesterday about how one station was switching up its approach to interviewing people at Michigan State University following last week's deadly mass shooting. Monday was the first day back on campus, and Fox 17 reporter Julie Dunmeyer was sent to cover it. Her approach: to tweet a photo of a television news photographer, the person working with her that day, standing next to his gear with a sign inviting people to talk to them and share their story. And then they waited for people to come to her. The text of her post reads, "We are not approaching students on campus today. If you want to take the mic, we're at the Rock. No questions, just whatever you want to share. This shouldn't deserve a gold star. It's just the right thing to do." Now, the replies to that tweet were largely complimentary, applauding her for what was seen as a genuinely humane way to approach the mundane, go out there and get the, human on the street, man on the street interview, in a way to let people tell their story on their own terms in the face of trauma. Your thoughts on the approach?
It's an evolving approach. It represents some of the concerns and debates that have come up in journalism really since the pandemic brought them to the forefront, this sense of how do we approach people? What is that relationship? And there's sort of a generational evolution where people, when I went through, was more, this is your job to get the story, and the students that we're teaching are coming in with more of a, these are people to interact with, not sources to go and interview. So from that sense, I think what they did, they found a spot that would be visible, that they knew students would be coming to.
Yeah, you're familiar with that campus. The Rock is, how would maybe people who are familiar with our campus, what would the Rock be the equivalent of?
Ooh, good question. The columns.
Okay.
Probably the columns.
Okay.
Maybe the tiger statue down on the South Quadrangle, but I think the columns are probably...
So someplace very easy to find.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, I agree with Keith. I mean, I think it is an evolution. And I think we in journalism are starting to realize that if we're going to get authentic stories from people, we can't push the mic in people's face and ask them, so tell me what you think. That standard question, or tell me what you saw happen, or tell me how you feel.
You're back on campus today. How does it feel?
Yeah, how does it feel? Yeah, and I think this is to me, this is a novel approach. I think it shows a lot of caring and humanity, which oftentimes the news media is accused of not having. And so it provides that opportunity, if you want to talk, if you want to tell your story about how you're dealing with this, we're here to hear that and listen and share that with a larger community.
One of the things that was interesting, you can watch her full report she filed that day on our Links blog, and in her stand-up introducing her piece, she is wearing a Michigan State polo shirt, a golf shirt. She indicates that she is a Michigan State alumna, as are many of the people in the newsroom, which also leads to another interesting point, the idea of a lot of those folks who are coming in and doing the "how are you feeling today" type questionings, not people who have a direct connection to the community or having to deal with the fallout that comes with the time a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks from now.
Right. And it's an interesting approach. It's one that, again, that old school, you're not the story part of me actually cringed at a little bit.
I kind of did too,
just
frankly.
In the sense of, I want to tell you I'm an alum and I feel and it's like, okay, I get the the humanity. I get I want you to know that we're not automatons out here just doing a job with no feeling. But I also think, but the story's not you. So there's a fine line, and it's a tricky line.
Yeah, you're right. It is a fine line. It's a tricky line. But I also think that you're also, or at least they were trying to be transparent about themselves and where they fit into this. And oftentimes, those of us in the news media are accused of not being transparent about those connections, not letting people know that, hey, I do have a connection here, especially in situations like this and in others that, I think, again, I agree with you, Keith. I cringed a little bit myself, but then it's also a generational thing, because even when we had connections, we definitely weren't going to talk about it. And I think now we're in that space where it might be good for us to be a little transparent about the kinds of connections we have and be upfront about that, not after we've done it, but while we're doing it.
Right.
So one of the things, Keith, and I'm going to tell a tale a little bit out of school, but you and I were talking about this yesterday for a few minutes, and you raised an interesting point that I've spent some time reflecting on, that what we should be doing is, as journalists, as the news media, collaborating or finding ways to rely more heavily on campus media in situations like this, and let the people who know the community best tell the community's stories. And I've been thinking about how we have seen, especially in areas of news deserts, where, our friend Charles Davis and the Grady College down at the University of Georgia doing this, and setting up newsrooms where the student media and the college students are providing content to greater communities, thinking about how maybe there could even be a new path forward there, where news organizations, if it's the Associated Press, if it's regional newspapers coming out of Grand Rapids or even Detroit, are funneling campus media out in a way. Yeah.
There's definitely an opportunity.
Yeah.
And the students who are covering these things, I've been looking at the state news website since last Monday, and they understand that environment, and they understand the location. They've got a perspective that reporters coming in from somewhere else, even close by, don't necessarily have that same sort of connection and perspective. So I think there definitely could be some opportunities there to say, look, these people are experts. They know where the students would be going to. They know how this is presented on campus. But I don't want to rely too much on that, because they're also young, learning journalists who haven't had the kinds of traumatic experiences that they're going through. So I think there would be a danger in just putting too much of that out there without some sort of coaching or the ability to work with those students.
Yep. I do think you have to be careful, because you do have to have the foundation and the support there to be able to sort of stand up an operation like that. And oftentimes when you have these partnerships between, say private media and campus, it's more along the lines of, well, we really need these reporters out there because we can't afford, or we feel like we can't afford to hire the professionals, so we'll use the students. And you have to avoid that, because again, it goes back to, our mission as education institutions is to help the students learn what they need to learn in order to be able to do that as a career, and not just send them out there to cover a news desert
and walk away with a clip.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Don Lemon was back on the anchor desk this morning alongside Caitlin Collins and Poppy Harlow. He'd been off one day and benched a few more after making this statement last Thursday in reference to presidential candidate Nikki Haley's stance: candidates over 75 undergo mental competency tests. Now, it's important to note, as you listen to what is about to play, we're going to have a clip which is coming to us from Fox News, which replayed it for Haley to respond to Lemon's comments. Okay, here's what he said.
This whole talk about age makes me uncomfortable. I think it's the wrong road to go down. She says people, politicians or something are not in their prime. Nikki Haley isn't in her prime. Sorry. When a woman is considered to be in her prime in her 20s and 30s and maybe 40s.
He made that comment. I wasn't sitting there saying sexist middle-aged CNN anchors need to have mental competency tests, although he may have just proven that point. What I was saying is we need to be transparent. Those elected officials that are making key decisions for us Americans on national security and keeping our kids safe and the debt, yes, we need to know exactly that we're sending people that are mentally competent to do that.
So is a woman who is in her 40s, mid-40s, and I will also say that as part of Lemon's statements, he said, just Google it. Women are in their prime in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. This gets under my skin a little bit, and I know that I'm not alone because staffers voiced their dissatisfaction quite loudly. And Chris Licht has said that Lemon sees the error of his ways and is going to be doing some training voluntarily, and that Licht believes in giving people a chance to learn and be better. But this is not the first time that Don Lemon has done or said something totally out of bounds.
Yeah, I thought for sure this would be the nail in the coffin. I really did, because he's done these types of things over and over and over again. I mean, it's one of the reasons why he lost his show.
It's lost his show. Like, I just keep thinking of Jussie Smollett all over again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just don't understand, why, number one, what would make him think that that was an okay statement to make? He
wasn't thinking,
Ernest. Yeah, that's true. He wasn't thinking. But on top of that, this would have been the place where CNN should have said enough is enough. Okay, you don't have your show anymore. We moved you to the mornings. We're giving you another opportunity. Then you go out and do this, and I just don't know, because his ratings aren't
not showing anything.
They're not showing anything great. So I just don't get it.
Well, and so ironically, if you want to talk about people distancing themselves from Don Lemon, George Santos said, "There's no way I'm sitting down with you. You're toxic." Canceled an interview instead. If George Santos doesn't want to talk to you,
how far down can you drop?
Right? Like, we've kind of hit that rock bottom there. Yeah. So while the sexist comments are flying on CNN, the BBC is issuing new guidance to its reporters. Ditch the business attire. The sweaty, dirty, open collar look is in, and it will make you appear more trustworthy to viewers. Ernest, I want to get your reaction on this one, because I know how you feel about trust and that our audiences haven't trusted us for decades. Yeah, so is wearing a dirty shirt and looking like you've been out in the field and embedded in whatever, is that going to be what builds the trust?
Nope, that's not. That's not going to have much. At least I don't think it's going to have much of an impact. Now, what happened and what the reporter decided to do at Michigan State, that's going to have more of an impact on whether or not the public sees us as human, as understanding. That's going to go a long way, as opposed to whether or not you're dressed in a certain way when you go out to do your job. I just don't get it.
Well, in a lot of ways, there's not a whole lot new, at least from some of the material that was presented online. You've had reporters in conflict zones dressed like they're in a conflict zone. You've had reporters out covering disasters and weather stories and so on. So, some of that, it's like, okay, there's nothing really new here. We wouldn't expect to see, in fact, we would, I think, find it weird to see a suit and a tie wearing reporter, or skirt and blazer wearing reporter standing in front of an earthquake site. Just that it doesn't fit in terms of where we are. So from that sense, yeah, we've been doing that. Right. And there is this sense that the sort of gritty, imperfect equals the authenticity people are looking for now. We've kind of seen some of that with, oh no, we like the user-generated, out-of-focus, tilted sort of picture because that means it's real. So I kind of get where they're coming from, but it's not really a new thing, and I agree. It's not the thing that's going to make the audience trust them.
Or tune in anymore.
Right.
Well, Cardinals fans and Blues fans know that if they want to watch the games on TV, they have to subscribe to Bally Sports through their cable provider. But what if the Bally Sports Networks fall into bankruptcy, as is rumored, after having put off an interest payment on $8 billion in debt last week? Forgive me, I may cough in a second. Is this an excuse that the MLB, NHL, and NBA need to really rethink how they reach Gen Z?
Well, I don't think that this is at least what they had planned on doing. And, part of it, MLB has a plan in place. If Bally goes under, they're going to take over the team's broadcasts. So the Cardinals fans are going to get it, but you get their games. But you have others that are going to probably run into problems. Where I think we're going to have a longer term issue is, okay, how do they sell those rights? Are they going to go to streaming services, which is one of the things they're talking about, which creates a lot of problems for the fan that watches those games on a nightly basis? Or are they going to basically turn them over to the teams and hope that the teams will be able to cut a deal with a local station to run it, which is the way it operated prior to Fox Sports taking it over and then Bally buying it from them. So I mean, there are various ways that they can go, but it's going to be difficult because I mean they are lucrative, but they're also costly. And
it's an evolution. Again, I guess that's my word for the day, but it's an evolution in the sense that you used to be able to turn on the local, assuming that there wasn't a blackout, but turn on the local TV station and watch your local team play, and turn on the radio, at least in that region, and listen to them and so on. So in one sense, the streaming services provide some opportunities for people to watch, participate, follow their favorite teams that untethers them from a particular point, but it leaves a lot of other people dangling in the wind. And so going back to those local sorts of, no, this is the station that carries the games, or this is the network that carries the games, I think there's an audience and a market there that still will sustain that.
And I mean, this speaks to a larger problem that sports is seeing all over. I mean, if you want to talk about right now, the big behemoth in the room is the NFL. Right. They have the majority, right? But what's happening is, so is college football, and the problem there is you've got Fox and ESPN, and then you have the SEC and the Big Ten, and then everybody else is the also-rans. Now you've got Major League Baseball that's having this problem. Their rights mainly go to ESPN and to Fox, and then you have those local channels out there. And it's the streaming part that's the problem, because people like to switch channels. You can't do that on streaming.
Not when you're streaming,
and that's where the problem comes in.
Or I also think my dad is a White Sox season ticket holder, would come to my apartment and want to watch a White Sox Kansas City game just because that's what happens to be. And if it's not on Bally Sports, because we're in the market, he still can't watch the White Sox game unless I were to have a VPN to get to a different market entirely. So those local blackouts become the issue. Well, we are just about out of time for this week. I would like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about each of the topics that we talked about today on our links blog. You can find that under both the programs and podcast tabs at kbia.org. We're also wherever you get your podcast downloads, including iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle there is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again, leave comments, questions, see what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, to Takia Thomas for handling the audio, Nate Brown for handling our social media, and Tim Pilcher, who composed our original theme music. I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.